And welcome back. Now, of course, like every other industry, the construction industry really needs to take a look at where it's going and what it's doing when it comes to driving diversity and inclusion. And this is something that is so important for this industry and indeed for everybody in it at all levels of involvement in this. So it's something that the industry is taking very, very seriously. And they're looking to make sure that we are looking at driving impact through diversity and inclusion in the construction industry. We have a great panel lineup for you to talk about this and to really look at perhaps some case studies in terms of where it's working well and perhaps also what needs to be done as well. So from the Isle of Wight NHS Trust, the Associate Director for Organisational Development will be joining us. Ricky Somal is on this panel. Also, Alison Watson joins us, and she is the Chief Executive from Class of Your Own Limited, and Caroline Gumble, the CEO of the Chartered Institute of Building. So that's our key panel, and I'm absolutely delighted to have as our moderator for this panel to the Head of Women's Empowerment Principle from UN Women. So a very warm welcome to Anna Falth, and I'm going to hand it over to Anna now to run this panel. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Etna, and good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to this session on driving impact through diversity and inclusion. I'm very excited to introduce you to an amazing panel. It's diverse. They come with from different walks of life with different work experience. And we have one thing in common is that we believe in diversity and inclusion. Myself, I'm Anna Falth. I will be moderating this session. I am the head of the Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat at UN Women. And the Women's Empowerment Principles is a global framework for companies around the world to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. We focus on gender equality through strong leadership, and we will hear about that today, but also on how we integrate gender equality and women's empowerment into workplace policies, in the marketplace, through supply chains, in the local communities, and what is most important is that we keep track of what we are doing so we can measure progress. We know that what measured get done, and we'll also hear a little bit of that today. But I'm very excited to introduce, we have three amazing speakers with us today. The first one is Ricky Somal. He is the Associate Director at the Isle of Wight NHS Trust. And we will hear a little bit about from him on his experience with diversity and inclusion. We will also hear from the founder and chief executive of the Class of Your Own, which has a very interesting approach to getting people into the sector. And Alison Watson will tell us a little bit more about that. And then we have Caroline Gumble from the Chartered Institute of Building, who also has strong leadership skills in this area, and I really look forward to hearing from her experience as well. I would like to ask each of you to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your experience in the engineering and the construction industry specifically. So let's start with Ricky Somal, if you could talk a little bit about your experience.
Hi, my name is Ricky. I'm the Associate Director of Organisational Development at the Isle of Wight NHS Trust within the UK. And thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. And one of the first questions I've been asked is around my role around diversity and inclusion and kind of my methodology in embedding diversity and inclusion in everything that we do as an employer and in terms of us as a service provider. My interest in diversity and inclusion came from working in the private sector, working quite closely with the Women on Board programme here in the UK, and then working within the National Health Service, a focus on how we connect our people with the vision and values of the organisation, how we respond positively to our quality, safety, operational and financial obligations, and how we recruit, develop and retain skilled and committed people. Diversity and inclusion has a specific focus on all of these key elements, and it's really important that we focus on enabling a business impact in terms of improved employee relations performance, in looking at strategic career mapping, looking at delivering the very best outcomes for our customers and our people within our workforce.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And we'll move over to Alison. If you could talk a little bit about your experience working, if you could introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about your experience in this field.
Thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Yes, my introduction to the industry came at 24 years old. I've been in the industry now for almost 25 years. I left school at 18 years old with no knowledge of the industry. I joined a bank. I didn't know what to study, so I didn't go to university until late in life as well. And I discovered the industry basically by falling in love. A strange pathway in, probably not the most common pathway. And I discovered surveying through meeting a civil engineer, and I've been a land surveyor ever since. I never met another female really on site, other than females who worked in administration, a few females who worked in HR, generally office-based. I was very, very much site-based. For the most part, I found it's a very, very pleasant experience. But it wasn't until I started surveying major school projects, major school building programme for the UK government, that I started meeting lots of young people. And I'd be surrounded by young people when I was in the playground of these schools. And sadly, very, very few of them knew about the professions in the industry. And unfortunately, the construction industry was resigned to very much a sort of trade and craft, manual, last resort opportunity for those children who didn't really know what they wanted to do in life, or indeed weren't particularly academic. And I found that extremely sad, because at the time when I was in school, because I suppose it's because I was a female, a lot of girls and boys were interested in what I was doing. I think the technology helped enormously. I had some great tech to work with. So I suppose the more I started working in schools, the more I felt compelled to do things differently. And I got slightly frustrated with the normal approach, which would be, talk to children in assembly, tell them a little bit about what you do, who you are, and how to get there. So I decided to write a curriculum program, which meant that the construction industry was essentially embedded in the timetable through STEM subjects, and that everybody got to know about it. And if we started young enough, that means all girls and boys would be introduced to the built environment. They would see the merit of maths and science, and English and geography for that matter. And we could dispel this myth that it was only for boys. And it is a myth. It's absolutely a myth. I've never believed it was for boys. I've never felt separate. I've never felt different. I've been welcomed massively as a female. So just over a decade ago, I decided to stop working as a surveyor, commit my rest of my life before I retire to writing curriculum. And ever since then, we've had lots and lots of girls and boys come through into the industry through progressive routes from 11 years old. So now I'm the chief exec and founder of Class of Your Own, and our program, which is Design, Engineer, Construct, is now going around the world, and we're having some extraordinary successes. So long may it continue. That's a little from me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Alison. This is really amazing. And I see also from Caroline, I'd like to ask you to do the same. Caroline, to introduce yourself. You're from the Chartered Institute of Building, but you also have this same commonality, I see, that you focus on skills development and lifelong learning. So over to you, Caroline, and if you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your experience in this industry.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and hello, everyone. Lovely to meet with you virtually. So well over 30 years ago, I had a first career of being a nurse. And the reason I became a nurse is because when I went to school, that's sort of what girls did. You either went to nursing, or you became a secretary, or you did what was in those days called jobs for girls. So I really fell into this world of nursing, which I have to be honest, I absolutely loved. But I used to do psychogeriatric nursing on night shift, and when my children came along, that was really difficult. It was great for shift patterns, but I thought, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And I didn't. So I took my education, my further education, a bit later than probably most people in my position today. So I actually did my degree, my further education, with 4 children and working as a nurse. And I alighted upon what in those days was called personnel, and I went into the automotive industry to work as a personnel training officer, because I thought, oh, that would be lovely. I can be really nice to people. When I actually got into the profession, I understood it was actually business, real business. And that's what I really did love. So in my first part of my career in manufacturing engineering, I was very much given the sorts of roles of going out to schools, talking to young people, encouraging them to come into the engineering sector, because in those days, not only were there live skill shortages, but that they were critical, and the projections were that they were going to get worse. So I put a lot of energy into that. And when I moved into this role about 18 months ago in the Chartered Institute of Building, at that time I was still managing 2 very, very large apprentice training schools. And my frustration after all the years, after working with brilliant people with sophisticated data around us, I was still finding it very, very difficult in engineering to encourage girls particularly to come in. But what I've learned as I've gone through my career into a chief executive level is a few things. One, you can have policies, you can be out there talking to school children, to anybody, but unless there's a genuine desire to actually create a very positive culture for everyone, whether it's a man or woman, transgender, BAME, any individual, then it's not really going to happen. And what I will say, this is not an HR issue. It's core to any business to create a culture that works for everyone. And I truly believe that passionately, and it starts with the leadership of any organisation, and not just to focus on protect what we would call in England protected characteristics. This is looking after everyone and treating everyone with dignity and respect. I'll stop there because I get rather passionate about this topic.
No, thank you so much. And I think what the 3 panelists today have in common is really that nothing happens on its own. We need to be there and nurture progress and really push the boundaries and make sure that we are moving forward. But Carolyn, I know that you're very passionate about this area, so maybe you could jump straight into the second question. What have we learned from this work that you just talked about in terms of embedding the culture of diversity inclusion into organization? What are the main lessons, and what can we draw from this and really recommend to our audience today what they could do based on those lessons that you have gained?
Okay, I think first of all, you need the decision makers, the people in power within an organization, to actually genuinely get involved in a scheme that we know very well in England, certainly, called reverse mentoring. I think if the decision makers, those with the power, actually stopped and spoke to different members of their teams at all different levels, younger people, maybe part-time staff, maybe people from different social backgrounds, all different backgrounds, and understood what it was like to work in their organisation through their lens, and listen, I mean genuinely listen and question actively. It isn't about putting wonderful policies out and ticking boxes to say, oh yes, we've got a policy, we've got an EDI officer, so we're ticking the boxes and doing the right things. It's genuinely listening and understanding and having zero, and I do mean zero, tolerance of negative and poor behaviours from anybody in the organisation. People need to feel positive when they go to work, that they can contribute and that they're part of that organisation, without fear, you know, of being belittled and feeling really negative in the organisation. So I think certainly reverse mentoring is something that I would really, really recommend. I'll stop for a moment to allow Alison to have her say before I steal all the topics.
Yeah, actually, I thought to ask a question to Ricky, because he comes with a background of behavioral economics and positive psychology. So I'm sure that he can also relate to the points that you're making. And I think the main point that you're coming here is all about empathy. To be able to empathize with your staff, empathize with the people around you, and it's not only about ticking boxes. But let's hear from Ricky, and then we'll move over to Alison. So Ricky, over to you.
Fantastic. So in terms of my key learning outcomes is how we embed and integrate diversity and inclusion in every part of our business operations. And there's three key elements that I've learned that work well. Firstly, having clarity around the outcome of what we're trying to achieve. What is our service offer within the organization around diversity and inclusion? And understanding the impact. What is the return on investment? What's the benefit realization of implementing diversity and inclusion within our organizations? So in terms of outcome, let's be very smart and specific. It's about people at all levels of our organization that conduct and plan their business to demonstrate due regard to eliminate any form of discrimination, to promote equal opportunity for everybody, and to foster good relations within the organization and beyond. So there's synergies within our corporate social responsibility programs. In terms of a service offer, what's worked well for me in terms of my learning of working in this space is around 8 key elements. The first one is leadership and management, an inclusive culture built on a foundation of promoting dignity and respect in the workplace. Secondly, having an organizational wide plan. This enables to integrate a well-led architecture for diversity and inclusion via our equality standard. And knowing your data, using staff experience and engagement to drive decision-making. The communication is really important as well, having regular communications of diverse stories with a focus on the vision and values of the organization. Engagement, a number of our organizations will have employee resource groups, equality network groups, and that can be a vibrant source of inclusion and sharing those staff stories. Organizational culture that promotes and celebrates diversity and individual differences. And the final 2 is focused around positive action. So looking at improving parity of staff experience and outcomes by protected characteristics of the workplace, and to evaluate and embed SMART objectives with defined performance measures across our legal, regulatory, and any commissioner frameworks that we have for diversity and inclusion in our organizations. And finally, my last learning is around impact, measuring a performance through an integrated D&I performance dashboard.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And Alison, I would like to bring you into the conversation. And if you could talk a little bit, maybe building on what Carolyn was talking initially about in embedding diversity and inclusion into culture, and the role of the leadership and the role of empathy in doing so. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you. And I absolutely agree with everything Caroline says. I think the one thing working with children that's opened my eyes is that they don't see barriers. They don't see these walls straight away and having to think about how to speak and what to say and everything else. I think one of the biggest things that frustrates me in the work that I do now is this automatic handover to the young ones because they understand the young ones better. So often, if we're talking about mentorship, particularly, and you know, influencers and inspiring young people, I get slightly frustrated that, you know, we automatically go to the young graduates, which is wonderful in itself, because young graduates as role models, they obviously have, you know, there's generally a little shorter age gap between the children who aspire to be them and indeed themselves, but they don't have the stories that we have. There's nothing. Sometimes there's nothing like the voice of experience. And I think when you're trying to attract young people, the stories that we can tell can be so exciting. When I think about the places in the world that I've been for my career in the construction industry, and indeed, you know, the projects that I've worked on that have been really inspirational to myself, not just to the young people who I'm telling. You know, I'm nearly 50 years old, and I can keep children really, really interested. I can inspire teachers to want to know more. But this, I almost think it's a little bit of make it easy by just sending the young grads, sending our younger employers, sending our young ambassadors into schools, because it saves us having to actually, you know, be bothered half the time. I know I could give one instance where I was talking to a very senior executive in a large construction contractor. And he said, oh no, our young grads always going, because nobody wants to hear me waffle on about this, that and the other. And I got really quite cross with him. And I said, you must be joking. After all your, you know, you are a role model, you're an executive, you're somebody who has had a lot of power. You should be first in the line to talk to young people about, you know, what we do, and your voice needs to be heard by young people, that you are actively seeking people like them to come into the industry. We want girls to come through, we want boys to come through. I mean, I'm quite generic about how I speak, because for me it felt normal to be a woman in industry, and I'm so sad how many women tell me a different story. I can remember once I had a phone call. Please give me, well, as she phrased it, she was doing a big article. I want to hear all the dirt that you have on your past experiences going on site. And I said, well, unfortunately, I don't know if it was just that I worked with men who just felt that they were equal to me, that's a different spin on things, but I had nothing but, you know, they were polite. When they offered to carry my tripods and heavy equipment, I let them, because they can be heavy when you're trekking around for miles and miles as a surveyor. You know, if they offered me a cup of tea, I'd take it. There was one instance where I did go to train some young engineers, and the site, the foreman looked at me as though he was very, very, surprised to see me. And I think it was that look of horror that, you know, but you're a woman. So I've had that one instance, and I turned around and made a joke and said, oh, don't worry, my friend, I'll do your ironing when I finish training all you blokes. You know, there's a certain humility, but there's also, I don't know, I want to drive more men to be championing women instead of just relying on young women to do it. It's not a brave thing to do. It's a thing that everyone should be doing. So the one thing I've learned, and the one thing that I've been advocating and indeed encouraging, is more senior executives to get in with young people, get in with teachers. Don't rely on the women to be the role models. Sometimes the best role models can actually be the men.
Great. Thank you so much, Alison. And I think I'd like to hear a little bit more, because we know that in this industry that it is a majority men, and women are the minority. So maybe we can hear a little bit more on this point. And maybe I can ask Ricky first, who is the man in this group, to give his views of how we can engage more men to stand up for these issues, and to really drive the diversity and inclusion agenda, and not only bring more women, but other people of different backgrounds that would love to be part of the sector, but haven't found the ways in. So how can we really bring out those champions, those role models, And Ricky, I'll ask you first, and then I'd like to go to Caroline to hear a little bit about your experience on this with creating this culture of diversity. So Ricky, over to you, and then we'll hear from the others.
So my thoughts and reflections on this question is around how do we become an inclusive employer of choice for everybody? When we think of the characteristics of or the individual differences of people, whether it be age, gender, religion or belief, race or ethnicity, disability, how do we ensure we provide equal opportunity in everything that we do? And a focus of undertaking a D&I diagnostic in regards to our attraction, our recruitment and selection process, onboarding, development, strategic career mapping, looking at our retention strategies, but also when we think of specifically in terms of our younger generation, is looking at involvement in corporate social responsibility activities with a focus on health and well-being. Furthermore, and when we think about 6 key principles, and for me, this is something that I've aimed to embed within my organization to make sure, which I think is transferable to the construction industry, is around identifying how do we embed and integrate a culture of safety? How do we integrate a culture of raising concerns? A culture free from bullying and harassment? A culture of visible leadership, a culture of valuing staff, and a culture of reflective practice, so we can continually identify what we are doing well in regards to diversity and inclusion and what we need to focus our efforts to continually improve. More specifically, I mentioned about health and well-being. This is about delivering a positive work environment for employees from all backgrounds. So this really links into the inclusion element of diversity and inclusion. And there are key organizational enablers and interventions to enable this to happen. When we think of the organizational enablers, this is focused around leadership and management, with a focus on board leadership, effective line management, and having that organizational wide plan. Data and communication is also really important, how we use data to drive decision making, looking at needs assessments and our methods of engaging our people, and also looking at the physical infrastructure, healthy cities, healthy buildings, in terms of bringing about the greatest benefit for our people. In terms of interventions, we need to look at inclusive interventions around learning and development, but when it more focuses on health and well-being, what are we doing to focus on the mental health, physical health, and healthy lifestyles of our people, especially in the COVID-19 context?
Thank you, Ricky. And Caroline, over to you. And I'd love to hear about role models that have inspired you, or role models that you might be the role model in your company to really speak up on these issues of diversity and inclusion.
Okay, thank you, Anna. And I think I very much what Alison was talking about earlier. I think men as advocates in what traditionally have been male-dominated industries is really, really important. And I've spoken to lots of men who lead companies, who are senior in their organisations, and often they haven't really understood that there's a problem. They haven't seen what it's like to work within the industry through a woman's or maybe somebody from a BAME background lens. So they start often from a position of ignorance. They don't even realise there's a problem, and sometimes they don't realise until their own daughters start on their careers and go through their higher education. So I think then it's a case of helping the male advocates, if they are the big decision makers, to feel comfortable that they're not going to be tripped up with language. I think I do hear people saying, oh, it's all politically correct, I don't know what to say, I don't want to offend anybody. So my answer to that, and what I've learned, is to be an authentic leader. I think, if you don't know, if you don't understand, if you don't know the right word, say that I don't quite understand this. This is different for me. There's training that people can have to feel more comfortable with the topic and to understand the topic better. So I think authentic leadership for me is something that goes a very, very long way.
I totally agree with you, Caroline, and I think we almost seem to be in an era now where it's better not to say anything than to say the wrong thing. I completely agree with that. I think we've got so hung up on political correctness, it's almost gone mad. And most, I would have to say that most women are very forgiving, actually, because you don't change behaviour by ignoring it. If we can, help men to feel more comfortable. And I actually totally understand why some of my male colleagues don't put themselves forward, because they do feel slightly threatened now by this very modern world, which I think is such a shame, because all that advocacy that we talk about could be lost for fear of saying the wrong thing. So totally agree. I think we need a different approach. I think it's been quite adversarial sometimes. I certainly met some women, and thankfully in the minority, but some women who almost have a chip on their shoulder and almost looking for men to say the wrong thing and to almost single them out. There's been a couple of occurrences in the past few years that I can think of that, I was almost disappointed in, my sex. I felt let down occasionally by the way that some women's attitude has become very aggressive and almost wanting to, tick boxes for how many mistakes men make. We're all human at the end of the day. That's the one thing we have in common, and let's remember that.
Yeah, I agree. And as the mother of 4 grown-up sons, I do say to them, they're white heterosexual males. Sometimes I say, well, the world's against you at the moment. So I've very much got that that empathy. But can I just turn for a moment about another group that we haven't really mentioned, and that's people with whether it's neurodiversity or physical, what is known as disabilities. I've been really heartened in construction recently when a new group has been set up from within the construction sector. They've called themselves Constructability, and it's looking at people's ability, not focusing on the disability. And I've been so motivated by those individuals. And what was fascinating, one of the founders of this new organisation suffers from OCD, and actually he is, for his organisation, the most perfect project manager, because nothing is going to slip through him because he's so focused. And that's what I love about construction. There are so many roles for so many abilities. It cries for diversity, and we know diversity is good for the bottom line. The more diverse a workforce is, the better the financial performance of that company. So why is it taken so long for the bosses to really grasp it?
No, thank you so much, Caroline. This is I really like this discussion on the authentic leader, to show empathy. And I've seen myself working on gender equality for many years, that we welcome men, and that very often they can empathize when they have a sister, a mother, their own daughters, and often their own daughters is when they wake up. But I think there are many, many different ways that we can engage men and really have them feel welcome. And it's not about being adverse to each other and fight, but it's all for all of us to make progress and welcome everyone. And I'm very glad to hear that the construction industry is really made for diversity, and that there are so many different roles. And Alison, I'd love to hear more from you on this. I see that you're burning for this issue.
Yes, I wanted to follow on again from Caroline's point about OCD. I mean, we work with a really fantastic school, Morehouse School in Farnham, and we've helped sort of set out ways of working with young people and indeed adults who have specific learning difficulties, as they would refer to them as. This school has students who have dyslexia, dyspraxia, Asperger's, etc., and some of these children who would never actually even consider a career in construction and engineering. You know, some of the children have made the most amazing engineers. Their minds are so creative, and it's wonderful to get to the classroom with a whole mixture of attitudes and you know, in one corner there'll be a young man who's sat there who just wants to be on his own, but my goodness, is he figuring out the most profound engineering issues. And then there'll be a chatterbox in another corner who you think, wow, leadership, presentation skills, absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's absolutely true. The construction industry, we should be asking, what can the construction industry do for you? Because I think in terms of an industry who has something for absolutely everyone in the world, it doesn't matter what you're into, what your hobbies are, what your specialisms are, what your sex is, you know, what your religion is, what your background is. There's something for everyone. And some work that we've been doing in Dubai very, very recently with a lovely school, a young ladies' school actually, who, you know, don't really do anything in STEM for construction or engineering. And we've also been able to break down a major taboo by working with these young ladies, and that taboo is cancer. We were asked recently by the Gems Al Barsha School to help them with a project for Pink Week, and Pink Week has just passed in Dubai, obviously. And we had the young ladies designing a early assessment centre for cancer. It was a modular building they had to design as an off-site manufactured building, and just bringing to the fore something that's a really, really important subject that is very, very taboo, particularly with the Emirati young ladies. You know, nobody talks about cancer, and it's almost a taboo subject in that, you know, we like to keep it under wraps. The approach is very, very different with these young girls. But in designing a centre that was specific for cancer and also specific for young people to be able to visit and talk about cancer, it immediately broke down those barriers and made cancer a very, very sadly normalised thing that everybody should be talking about and everybody should be identifying early. So I think the power that we have through education, through inspiration, through getting professionals involved with young people, you know, and particularly young people who would never even think of joining an industry that, you know, for years they've been told is not for them. You know, we can do some wonderful things. We have to be innovative, we have to be creative, and we have to think about the future, not the past. And let's get rid of all those old barriers that used to stop us talking about, you know, the industry and this dirty world and the men's world. And, you know, it's a load of rubbish. So the success that we're having in young people driving through that agenda makes me think that we'll be having a very, very different conversation in 10 years with the young professionals who are coming through.
No, thank you, Alison, for this. I myself, when I pass by a construction site here in the US, there is a sign saying men working here. And I always feel like I should have a big pen and go and just say people, or just add to say women. There are no women working, unfortunately, but just the fact that the sign says that men are working here already exclude everybody else from different perspective, whether it's linked to sexual orientation or women or any other ones are automatically excluded. So if we can remove those messaging, I think we're coming a long way. And I think that what we've heard from the conversation today is really around gender and other type of stereotypes that dictates where people are going and what careers they're choosing. And we heard that earlier from Caroline. So I think it's a good segue to our last question that we have for today. What can we do better, and what can the construction industry really do better to welcome young people? So Caroline, if we can start with you, and then we'll go with Ricky and then Alison. Thank you.
Okay, I want to say the normal things like make sure you train your staff and you're interested in them and you develop them and give them opportunities. But I'd like to reverse all of that slightly and say, look, the construction sector is made up of thousands of people across the world, and we now have a tool. Following on from your earlier discussion, Anna, about the image of the sector, we have something now called social media. And when I go out to meet people on construction sites, I encourage them to tell their stories. I see young people responsible for huge parts of project management, construction sites. I see people doing all sorts of amazing things that they should be so proud of, but what they traditionally do, they go to work, they do a fantastic job, and then they move on to the next job. And I'm trying to encourage the sector to self-promote itself, and by doing that, they're sharing with other people from all different walks of life that if I can do this, you can do it. So that's my challenge to the audience. Start really celebrating what you're doing, because you're doing a fantastic job, and I'm very proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And Ricky, over to you.
In terms of what we can do better, I think it starts off by undertaking a equality, diversity and inclusion diagnostic within our organizations to really take an opportunity to review, reflect and refocus our efforts on inclusion prior to COVID-19, during COVID-19, in terms of working through the pandemic and beyond the COVID-19 context. So I've designed an integrated diagnostic framework for diversity and inclusion, which I'm very happy to share with our delegates attending this very, very important event, which is held by DMG Events Management. And some of the critical elements I would focus on is to think about a multi-methods approach to diversity and inclusion training and development, in line with a 70-20-10 model, which looks at blended learning opportunities with a strong evaluation methodology to ensure impacts and benefits are realized, whilst ensuring our equality, diversity and inclusion principles are considered within any packages that we deliver. Schaller in 2011 designed the person-centered care standards, which is a fantastic method to use when thinking about the 6 key principles of the culture of safety that I mentioned. In terms of further learning, I'm a very big advocate of positive psychology, and I've seen some fantastic initiatives and programs across the UAE and across the globe around introducing the PERMA model of positive emotions, engagement, relationship management, meaning and accomplishments within the workplace, which ties in with the diversity and inclusion agenda. And finally, thinking about the principles of behavioral economics by Richard Thaler and looking at inclusion nudges in the workplace, where we can demonstrate our commitment through policy, procedure, training and development and interventions for inclusion, but then also what is the personal responsibility of our people when it comes to their own health and well-being, and when it comes to their career development, progression and integration within our organizations.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And Alison, I would love to hear a little bit more. You're working with young people every day, so please share your experience and what is it that we can do better?
Well, we could do a lot better, and I'm afraid it starts right at the top with government. Unfortunately, there's very, very little opportunity to make construction more accessible through policy. And through policy changes, they can actually have a huge impact. Embed construction from a very, very young age in the national curriculum. Take away this ridiculous notion that construction is, a low achieving subject, because from a STEM point of view, from a high achievement point of view, from a scientific point of view, there's something for everyone and something to learn. And I keep, as a surveyor, I have to be an advocate of measurement. What's more boring to actually draw a triangle on a whiteboard and ask children to calculate the area, or to get them out of their seats outside and go physically do it. So I think the government has a lot to answer for, and I'm talking the global government here. Governments in every country could do a lot more for the industry by making it more accessible through education. So that's the first challenge. And the second challenge, again, is more to, I suppose, the heads of decision makers for urban regeneration, particularly urban regeneration, because that comes into social value and procurement. And I think, again, if construction companies had to do more, I think if it was written into procurement, that, and indeed, let's help them through procurement, learn better how to deliver that social mobility, to deliver that social impact and the community benefits they talk about so much. So there's an awful lot could change if it was just driven through almost legislation, that companies had to do the right thing and stop doing this terrible box ticking exercises. A quick careers fair, a quick chat with a child does not mean that child will be influenced, and it certainly doesn't help their learning. But yeah, again, for the most part, I love my industry. I love it with a passion that I'm proud of in myself. Passion is something that is used all too easily. But both myself and Caroline, and I'm sure Ricky for his part as well, are passionate about our industry, passionate about new people coming through, and passionate about making it a place for everyone. So governments of the world, get your act together, please, and help inform more young people what a wonderful place this is.
Thank you, Alison. So that really calls, I think, for everyone to give just one key recommendation to the participants today. I have a few on my own that I'd like to sum up with. Caroline, if you have one recommendation that you'd like to present to the participants today, what is that one?
I think at the end of the day, it's the only limitation in this sector is your own attitude. It's there for you, so please go for it.
Thank you, Caroline. Alison?
I think the one piece of advice from me is see your local school as a diverse talent pool. Get in there, do things properly, work, stop with your short-termism, think long-term, think nurture. We mothers are very, very good at that. And if you want any help, get in touch.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been such an inspiring conversation. And what I have taken away is that this sector is screaming for diversity, is made for diversity, and is even welcoming people of different abilities, disabilities, from different walks of life, from different genders, different ages, and it's a very welcoming sector. I think there is a perception of what the sector is about, and what we've learned, that role models really matter. We heard from Caroline that social media is a venue for everyone to self-promote the industry, the company, themselves as role models for inclusion. And I think that what we also learned from this conversation is that we need to bring in children at an early age. It's not going to happen by itself, but children is a good age group because they don't see walls. They see all the opportunities, and to give them an glimpse of the sector at an early age would really help them to go in this direction and join this amazing workforce in the sector. What we also learned is that this is a responsibility of all of us. We talked a little bit about engaging men. We talked about leadership, being an authentic leader, to show empathy, to really understand the people, to be able to create this very booming industry with full and of energy and diversity. And finally, from my point, working with our women's empowerment principles, I feel like they fit right in here. And we have, Alison, you were talking about procurement. We have guidance on how to do procurement from a diverse perspective. We have guidance on how to engage and how to recruit people from a diverse perspective. And so I'm welcome everyone participating today to have a look at the Women's Empowerment Principle, make a decision today to really join and sign up to these principles and really help this sector to flourish with inclusion and diversity in its core. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you so much to Ricky, Alison, and Caroline for your amazing insights to this conversation and for sharing your experience. Thank you very much.
And what a lively and indeed what an impactful conversation that we had there. Really, it is one of the topics of our time, without a doubt. Diversity and inclusion, and particularly when we look at the construction industry and we look at the changes that are going on in this industry. So it's the perfect time to make sure that we're beginning to see more diversity and inclusion. A huge thanks to Anna Falth there for moderating that conference. And unfortunately, Anna couldn't stay with us, nor could Caroline at the moment. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back Ricky Somal and Alison Watson's with us here. Thank you both so much. And Alison, if I may start with you. And earlier on when we were listening in that conversation there, you talked about education and also the need, I think, for this to perhaps start as a part of the STEM agenda, to have it part of the curriculum and really have people perhaps at a younger age start looking at trades. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I think getting anybody interested, particularly in STEM, that has to happen at a younger age, but with that focus on the importance of trades. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we've talked about the diversity of construction, the jobs that are available. I think, sadly, the construction industry, when I was growing up and when I was in school, the trades were always for, and I'm going to be brutal about this because it's exactly how it was, for the boys who can't. And the girls went into hairdressing and even the career advice. It's interesting, Caroline mentioned she started out as a nurse. I was told you can be a nurse, or be a maths teacher. Construction never ever came into it. And I can remember the lower classes in my school, the boys were channeled into the local college if they weren't going to be high achievers in maths, for example. It's been so wrong. We've got it so wrong. I mean, the trade, when I started surveying and I went out on site and met the tradesmen, and I have to say tradesmen, there weren't very many tradeswomen, that's for sure, in the sort of 90s. These guys are bright, articulate people. They taught me so much. I would learn so much more around how the ground worked by just getting in the trench and talking to the ground workers, talking to the bricklayers. And I laugh because one of the stories I always use with the children is, bricklayers, they use Pythagoras theorem all the time. Our buildings are not square. Wouldn't be square if it wasn't for these fantastic people. So I think it's about time we're really, really focused on the trades. And don't let's forget, that the way the trades are changing, digitalization of the construction industry doesn't just mean the engineers and the architects and the surveyors. It's also, we look at offsite manufacturing. This is becoming, part of robotics. It really, really is getting more and more and more entrenched in the STEM agenda. So the trades should be looked at, and children, making things, doing things, you have to have a brain behind doing, otherwise you don't do it very well. So I think it's about time we gave more respect to the trades and saw the immense career opportunities that there are in the trades, and particularly as they evolve with digital. The trades of the future will not be the trades of the past, that's for sure, and they did deserve more respect.
Yes, and we'll talk more about that because I think you're so right too, and it needs that focus from the industry, and it needs, I think, from education as well. So it's an area where I think they can both work together. Ricky, when you talk about, enabling the business focus of diversity and inclusion and the return on investment, we're looking at this as a global issue because it really is a global issue. It's not country to country. And of course, every country, every company, I think the will is there. People want to do something. But how do you convince them when it comes to, I suppose, the return on investment? Because there probably have to be maybe a few, not necessarily sacrifices, maybe a few compromises along the way.
Thank you. And for me, the return on investment question always starts with what are we trying to invest in and what outcome are we trying to achieve? And it's quite often, in my experience, working in the National Health Service and in the private sector prior to that, was that question wasn't really answered, and that has then have an impact on what we're trying to measure. So I mentioned earlier about the diagnostic phase being so important, because the engagement of our people then enables us to identify what is really important to them, and then focusing on the whole employee journey. So thinking about, and I love Alison's point around the education and the promotion and the marketing of the construction industry. Quite often with the National Health Service, people think of doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, but they won't think of they could have a flourishing and an impactful construction, estates and facilities career within the health industry. So again, it's working very closely with our education sector, schools, colleges, universities, career fairs, and highlighting and promoting all the amazing opportunities that are available to them. The return on investment question for me, very much specified around what our people told us, was around the impact of bullying and harassment, was the impact of career development and progression, access to training and development opportunities. So whilst we have a focus on the digital agenda, which is absolutely the right thing to do, we need to have to think about how do people then appropriately stay safe and focus on their health and well-being whilst working either remotely, digitally, or on site in the COVID-19 context and beyond. Just to give you a quick example, following in the last 12 months in January, I undertook the diagnostic within my own organisation when I started, and we increased equal opportunities, perception and experience of equal opportunities and career progression by 30% for our Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. And we also saw a 10% reduction in the experience of bullying and harassment and the experience of discrimination as well. So again, having a focused response on those three key areas has brought about a positive improvement.
Alison, just following on from what you had said there, we have a question in here in terms of, how do we actually include the younger generation in the construction industry? And, obviously from engaging with them at a younger time to move it beyond that and to make sure. But where do you see, areas that are working? And you talked about working here, with a school in Dubai and some of the great work that you have put in place. So it is possible and it can work, but it's about maintaining that. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think let's look at local talent pipelines that, all around the world, there are people, like me going into different countries to design, engineer and construct buildings. I mean, the curriculum I wrote was given a name for that reason. That this talent pool, this melting pot of young people around the world that we can tap into. But we need to give them a conduit to be able to learn about the industry, and indeed to be able to help them. So, if you think about project-based learning, we are all working on major projects, whether that be a skyscraper, a new highway, a new rail system. They are all projects, and we're always learning as an industry every day. So when you think about project-based learning in the classroom, what better, amazing real-world project can we give to children than actually being involved in them? And if you think about right from concept design and all the challenges we have around end user engagement, making sure we are designing for the people who will use these major projects. When you think about planning and legislation, children can have an amazing voice in that. And I think the fact that if we involve them right from the very beginning, instead of when we break ground and do the usual tokenism of, construction company gets children in to do some nice stuff, hard hats, helmets, walk around the site, take some nice photographs for the local newspapers. Aren't we wonderful? And I'm not trying to diss that, don't get me wrong, but we miss out on so many opportunities to get the children to actually learn and how that actually feeds into all the subjects that they study in school. So giving the children a voice through that major project, to allowing them to learn about the physics of a project, the mathematics of a project, and getting them to be involved as the local community who will be using that project. The opportunity is immense. We've just got to have the wherewithal and the will to actually do it. And I think, through curriculum, through working very, very closely with schools, we can map across the curriculum to where all those different opportunities fit, enable teachers to learn too, because teachers are our greatest ambassador. They are there all the time with our children. They are the ones who can champion the industry, but let's give them an opportunity to get involved too.
You're so right. I think it can be such a very exciting thing, but it is about making it real, really. And we don't have a whole lot of time, Ricky. If I might talk to you in terms of the concept of leadership and the need for, this intent to be very clear. And I find in many industries too, when we see the CEO come out and actually announce this and take some action about it, then it happens and everyone gets on board. How important is it that we get a signal from the leaders?
Absolutely, and I think this is, and again, just literally thinking what Alison's saying around the impact of apprenticeships and placements that we hold within our organisations to give real life experience. But from a leadership perspective, I think this is where the buy-in is so important, but to understand the challenges around inclusion, around the different protected groups, whether it be for younger people, for ethnic minorities, and people with disabilities, and having a kind of a person-centered, holistic approach to that. And quite often, I think it's engaging and in building the kind of architecture of engagement between the most senior leaders within our organizations and with our communities and with our education sector, and people like Alison, to kind of raise that education and awareness of what we are doing well, but also the challenges to improve the recruitment of younger people into the construction industry.
Alison, I have about 30 seconds left. In terms of that leadership focus and taking ownership of it, do you think that that's vitally important for all industries around the world?
It absolutely. That our world, we've been through some real challenges over the past 12 months, and our world, with climate change and everything else, we're going to need some great leaders in the future. So great leaders influence the new leaders, get children involved, because they have so much to give. It's a great industry. I love my industry. I love everybody who works in it. We can do so much more. So let's do it together.
And perfect timing on 30 seconds. Thank you so much for that. It is that mathematical mind. It's that construction. It's all of that. Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you, Ricky and Alison. I'm really grateful. It was great to have you for the Q&A. Thanks again.